For a long time, the Soviet Union refused to accept a simple idea that one person could commit a series of similar crimes over many years and remain unnoticed. That kind of reality didn't fit the official image of society, because if something keeps happening again and again, then it isn't random. And if it isn't random, then it's no longer just about one individual. It becomes a problem of the system itself. That's why this story is not just about Andrei Chikatilo. It's about fear, bureaucracy, investigative mistakes, and a system that took far too long to understand what it was dealing with. Andrei Chikatilo was born in 1936 in what was then the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. Later, he worked as a teacher and then as an engineer. On the surface, he appeared completely ordinary, quiet, unremarkable, the kind of person you might not even notice in a crowd. And that was exactly what allowed him to avoid suspicion for so long. Today, people often focus on the number of victims. But what matters more is something else. More than 10 years passed between the first crime linked to him and his eventual arrest. For years, he lived a normal life. He went to work, traveled, spoke with colleagues, just like millions of others. And that is what made this case so disturbing. There was no obvious monster, no clear warning signs, just an ordinary man hiding in plain sight. By the early 1980s, bodies of children, teenagers, and young women began to be discovered in the Rostov region and nearby areas. At first, these cases did not form a clear pattern. Different investigators handled different incidents. Theories did not match, and the idea of a serial offender was still difficult to accept. Eventually, the investigation expanded into a large-scale operation. And this is where the story becomes especially important, because this case is also about how investigations can fail. Hundreds of people were questioned. Many were suspected. Some were even arrested for individual crimes. In one of the most tragic mistakes, an innocent person was convicted, while the real perpetrator remained free and continued his crimes. This was one of the darkest aspects of the entire case. While the system tried to show that everything was under control, the real threat was still out there. The peak came around 1984. By then, it was no longer a coincidence. It was a pattern, a deeply disturbing one. In September 1984, Chikatilo was detained for the first time. This is one of the most striking moments in the story. There were already reasons to suspect him, but it led nowhere. He was released, and after that, the crimes continued. Looking back, this moment feels especially difficult, because this was not a situation where no one knew. This was a moment when the danger was already within reach, and still slipped away. After that, he changed his place of residence and continued living a seemingly normal life. At the same time, the investigation grew larger. Hundreds of officers were involved. They studied patterns, locations, behavior. But even at that scale, it took years to identify the suspect. At this stage, another important figure appears: psychiatrist Alexander Bukhanovsky. He created a detailed psychological profile, not a dramatic or fictional one, but a structured analysis. It described a person who appeared ordinary, socially invisible, disciplined, and capable of gaining trust. That profile would later play a crucial role. And this is what makes the case especially interesting. While some were looking for a monster, others began looking for someone who was very good at appearing normal. And that turned out to be much closer to the truth. The turning point came in 1990. Shortly before his arrest, he once again drew attention near a railway area and a wooded location. A police officer recorded his details. That small detail later became important. On November 20th, 1990, he was arrested. This time, he was not released. But even then, the story did not end immediately. He did not confess right away. And once again, a psychological approach played a key role. It helped lead to a full confession. This was one of those rare cases where solving the crime required not only investigation, but also understanding the person behind it. The investigation linked him to dozens of crimes. Different sources mentioned different numbers, but the scale was undeniable. The trial began in 1992 and became one of the most widely discussed cases of the post-Soviet period. By that point, this was no longer just a criminal case. It was a public shock. People saw not only the scale of the crimes, but also the scale of the failures that allowed it to continue for so long. In 1994, Andrei Chikatilo was executed. Formally, the case was closed. But in reality, it never truly ended, because it left behind questions that go far beyond one individual. How was this possible? Why was he not stopped earlier? Why did the first serious detention lead nowhere? Why did a system built on control and order take so long to recognize what it was facing? Maybe that's why this story still resonates today, not only because of the crimes themselves, but because of the collision between two things: human darkness and a system that failed to recognize it in time. This case is remembered not just because of the individual, but because of the blindness around him: professional, bureaucratic, and even ideological. And perhaps the most unsettling part is that stories like this are never about just one person. They are also about the environment, the mistakes, the denial, the failure to see what is right in front of you until it's too late. That is why this is not just a story about a criminal. It's a story about the cracks in a system, about how normal life can hide something much darker, and about the cost a society pays when danger is not recognized and not stopped in time.